We have word problems to model for today, so we're going to start the first one with solve so you can get a sense of my thought process on paper, and the next two we're going to jump just right into showing a plan in action. So hit pause for a second and just read through the problem. Okay, there's a lot of information here. There are probably a lot of words you were underlining. Ultimately, they're asking us to do two things. Find the scale for a model, and then we're going to use our model to locate the jewelry shop on that model. We're going to represent that location. We have to find its location. There's a lot of information in this problem having to do with location, and you'll notice that a lot of them have to do with north and south. So that's already making me think that my model should be a vertical number line as I'm going up and down. And we could also see everything is kind of in relation to the pizzeria. So I'm going to use the pizzeria as my central point, as my zero, as I'm figuring out the location for all these things. And here's my plan. I'm going to create the vertical number line to model where all the locations are. And I'm going to use the distances that are listed in the problem, in my O part of solve, to figure out what the appropriate scale should be, because I want something that will meet all those needs. And then I'm going to use my model to find the halfway distance between the pizzeria and that jewelry store. And that way I can name what that number is. So hit pause so you can jot this down into your notes. So I have my vertical number line, and remember, everything is in relation to the pizza shop. So that's going to be my central point, like my zero. That's what zero represents in my model. And I'm going to put the pizza shop. And looking at my numbers or paying attention to them here, we know that Jeanette's house is 1/3 block past Jill's. Jill's is 1 block north of the pizza shop. And the park is 4/3 blocks. So all those numbers, and I have 3. We have 1, and then we have a third listed. We have 4/3 listed. So this is telling me that my scale is not going to be a whole number. I'm going to use a rational number. I'm going to go by thirds and by 1/3 blocks. That's going to be my scale. And so counting from the pizzeria, I'm going to start going north. I'm going to count by thirds: 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. I'm going to put a 1. 1/3, 2/3, another 3/3. I'm going to put a 2, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. -1, and here's -2. And now I can start listing where all those places are on the map. The first one is, let's start with Jill's house, and she's 1 block north. So important distinction. She's not just one of these units. I have to go all the way to 1. That's her distance. So let's put that in. Here's Jill's house. And I would note that as just +1. Next, we have Jeanette, who is 1 block past Jill's. Well, 1/3 block past. So if I get to Jill, I have to go 1/3 past it. So that's further north. So here's Jeanette's. And she would be at 1 1/3. That's where I would place her. That's the exact location. Next, we have the park, which is 4/3 south. So now I can count by thirds. Notice the difference. With Jill's, I was 1 block, but here it's telling me the park is 4/3 block south. So I can count by thirds: 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Here's 4/3 right here, and that's what a park is. And I could represent this as -4/3, or I could even represent it as -1 1/3. Both of them are valid. And lastly, we have the jewelry shop, which is halfway between the park and the pizzeria. So halfway between here and here. So let's think of our distance. We're going 1, 2, 3, 4/3. So halfway would just be here at the 2/3 mark. So here's our jewelry shop, and it's halfway. You heard me count. So we'll be at -2/3. So we have all our destinations listed here. Now we can go to the E part and make sure we're really answering that question and explaining our reasoning since they asked for that. Let's change it to blue. What number represents Jenny Jazz's jewelry shop? -2/3 represents Jenny, a lot of words, Jenny Jazzy jewelry shop, because the shop is 2/3 blocks south of the pizzeria. I'm calling it a pizzeria, which on my model represents 0. So there you go. I have it listed -2/3. I'm explaining why, because it's 2/3 blocks south of the pizza shop. And I'm also naming that the pizza shop represents 0. So hit pause and jot this down into your notes. Here's our second story problem with Felicia. Hit pause and take a few seconds just to read through the problem. Here's the important information that I got out of this as I was underlining. We knew this was a story problem, and she has to relate the order in which -6.5 and -10 are represented on the number line. So this has to do with their locations, like where they're located. She wants to show a connection between them. And her story goes, it's a football game. The team lost 2 consecutive downs. On the first one, they lost 6.5 yards, and on the second, they lost an additional 10 yards. So on her number line, what does she do? She represents this. Here's Felicia's number line. Here's 0. First, by locating -6.5, because that's the first situation. So she moved 6.5 from 0 to the left of 0, and then she grabs the point. The second point by going from 0, 10 yards to the left, to -10. So does this show the relationship between these two numbers? Do you agree or disagree? Is this a good story problem that really shows the order in which these two problems are represented? And the order really matters. Think about that for a minute. I'm going to disagree. I disagree with Felicia. Why do I disagree with Felicia? Because we're talking about the order of 2 events, and this is how my story would be modeled. So we're starting at 0. We know that he sacked 6.5. So I'm going to show the same loss, going to the left 6.5 to get to -6.5. But then what's the second ordered thing that happens? The second thing that happens in the story is that they lose another 10 yards. So she is losing another 10, so I'm moving 10 more to the left, and I will get to -16.5. So because in the story, the quarterback loses an additional 10 yards from -6.5. He's not starting the story again at 0. So this is why I disagree, because the order of the two things that happened, they're not independent. They were happening consecutively, back to back. And my chart really shows a back to back. So I would say that Felicia needs a different story problem to connect these two numbers. Hit pause so you can also jot this down in your notes.